Joe McMoneagle is somebody I met many years ago, actually, at a MUFON conference. He spoke at a MUFON symposium on the theme of RV, remote viewing, and UFOs. But like I said, don't just think about RV in terms of UFOs or DOD or that kind of thing. This is a topic that he has expanded and really delved into a whole lot of areas that are pretty much shaking up a lot of paradigms. So I'm not sure what angle he's going to take today, but I'll give him a little trouble though. But he put it on his Facebook site, so I'm not speaking out of school. He did say he was asked to view MH370. And I don't know if he's going to disclose anything, but he did put that on Facebook, so I'm not making stuff up here. But we can see if he'll even state who asked him, did he get paid, what's going on with that, but he probably won't tell us anything. But that's the only teaser I could think of with Joe. But Joe has went down to Central Virginia and began working with the Monroe Institute, especially after he linked up with Nancy, his wife, who was Nancy Monroe, who was very involved with the Monroe Institute. If you're not familiar with the Monroe Institute, it is kind of a woo-woo kind of place that teaches remote viewing and many other meditation, all kinds of things. They have a beautiful architecture too. They have a lovely building, and it's just kind of a nice, a wonderful place right there in Central Virginia. So from Virginia myself, I will say we have a lot of interesting installations like that. There's also the ARE Center, the Edgar Cayce Center, which is out in Virginia Beach. So Virginia has a reputation, the Old Dominion, of being kind of stuck in their ways and looking backward or whatever, but we are progressive in terms of these kind of edge sciences with those two places. I will give you Joe McMoneagle.
Thank you. I don't think can you hear me? You hear all right? I don't need to.
I don't know.
There.
What do you think? These lights be dim. I'm just asking the video. What do you think?
Well, it doesn't matter to me because I have a mic, but if people in the back
Can you hear me back there?
Yep.
Okay. I'd rather not use the mic if I can get away without using it. First thing I want to do is tell you something about myself. I was the first one recruited for the Army project simply because I was the first one through the door. And when I was tested at SRI, I was tested on 6 double-blind remote viewings. Now, I had never heard of remote viewing before, but my results were 5 perfect results and 1 near perfect. So I did not volunteer for it. The general volunteered me. And so by the time I got back to Fort Meade, I was in the project. That's also the day that I can say that my career died, because anybody who was involved in the psychic program was crazy, according to many people in the federal government. We had lots of supporters, but most said we were crazy. I spent 6 years in the project at Fort Meade, and then I retired from the U.S. Army. And the day I retired from the U.S. Army, I was hired by SRI as a guinea pig. It was also a way of keeping me in the collection part of the project. I worked at SRI as a research associate until 1988, and the lab closed at SRI when DIA took over the project from the Army. The lab moved to Science Applications International Corporation, which of course is owned, run, and operated by ex-directors of the CIA. And I was fired at SRI and hired by SAIC on the same day as a research associate, so they could keep using me for collection and study me like a lab rat. When the project closed formally in November of 1995, it closed because the Congress directed that the CIA should assume full managerial authority over it, and they didn't want it, so they had a review of the program and found it dysfunctional and closed it, although we had supported them for 20 straight years. I was fired at SAIC the day it closed and hired by Cognitive Sciences Lab in Palo Alto, where I'm a partner and a lab associate. And we're still doing remote viewing research as well as research in a whole lot of other areas in the paranormal. We've done research in 7 other countries. And in the year 2000, I went to Moscow and met my counterparts and did remote viewing with their best remote viewer. So I'm an honorary member of the Russian remote viewing unit. I'm also the only remote viewer that was given the honor of becoming a full member of the Parapsychological Association as a psychic. I'm the only psychic in history that's ever become a full member of the PA. I also have no degree. I have almost 400 credit hours, but no degree, so that's a unique thing. I'm going to start the talk now. I guess I just point this. There we go. Facts and fiction. There's a lot of fiction as a result of the remote viewing unit being exposed on Nightline in 1995. Before it was exposed, there were approximately 16 total viewers in the unit, and maybe total over a 20-year period, 50 individuals that had ever seen the inside of our operations. Within 6 months of the closing of the unit, I found out on the internet that I had worked with about 3,000 other viewers. And they taught me a lot. And some of those people I supposedly worked with were actually in the unit itself. One character by the name of Ed Dames being one of those individuals. I never worked for him. And he was not a remote viewer, by the way. The origins of the remote viewing program is kind of interesting because a lot of mythology around that as well. Originally, there was a lot of studies in remote viewing started in the mid-1940s in America, but it actually started much earlier than that with a man by the name of René Collier, who presented 30 years of research in 1946, which was basically nothing but remote viewing that he had done with his daughter. It's exceptional work, and that particular book can be obtained from Hampton Roads Publishing. It's been republished by them. It's a very interesting book. Ingo Swann was tipped to the SRI research by Cleve Baxter. You remember him? He did all the research with plants, you know. And as a result, he moved to SRI in 1972 and began working with Hal Puthoff. This is long before it was called remote viewing. Ingo Swann came up with a term, and it's really a misnomer because remote viewing, you don't see anything. It's extremely rare. In 37 years of remote viewing, I've actually only seen the target maybe 7 times. The rest of it is perceptions. Everything from noises, smell, touch, taste, feelings, gut reactions, that sort of thing. The first publications were in, let me see if I can back that up. No, I guess I can't. The first publications were in the IEEE in 1976 by Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, and the proceedings of the AAAS in 1979. There were numerous entities playing with remote viewing from 72 to 78. Mostly it was the interest of the CIA. The CIA actually hired SRI to investigate its possible use for intelligence purposes. It was initiated as a test program. For some reason, this isn't working with this system, so you'll have to pardon me as I try to figure out what to do with it. It was installed as a test program in 1978. It was called Gondola Wish. That's what its first name was. It was a 3-year program. And the reason why is because everybody knew psychics were crazy. And they knew we were just throwing a lure out there to get the Proxmire Golden Fleece Award. So in their wisdom, the Army said, well, what we'll do is we'll emulate the Russians. Since we know the Russians are using psychics and we want to know how good they are, What we'll do is we'll select some psychics of our own, but they have to have clearances, and we'll take them out of the Army counterintelligence units, and we'll teach them how to do remote viewing the way we think it should be done, but we'll call them Russian remote viewing artists, and we'll release them into the wild in America, and they can target the Pentagon and the White House and places like that for a year, and then we'll bring them back in out of the cold at the end of that year, and we'll take all of their material and turn it over to the NSA or some independent agency and have them evaluate it and tell us how good they think it was or how bad. And that'll tell us how good or how bad the Russians are. And if anybody jumps on us for it, we can say, oh, no, we don't believe in this stuff. We're pretending to be Russians that believe in it. Problem was, we had an incident, it's called the fall of the American Embassy in Iran in November of 1979. When the embassy fell, it was on a Sunday, and they had no idea who was in the embassy and who wasn't. And if you can't tell the people who take your hostages who the hostages are, they can disappear people permanently. So they thought it's a long shot, but let's see what these guys can do. We'll just throw it to them because this is a target no one knows anything about. So we got the target, a couple of us were put in a war room with about 590 photos and asked to identify who were the specific hostages. We came up with a list, or actually came up with 64 photos, or 61 photos we pinned to the wall, and it included 3 sketches done in pencil. Those were of CIA agents no one even knew were in country. They were picked up at the Foreign Affairs Office. If we hadn't sketched them, they'd be disappeared today. As a result, we went from a study project, only a month and a half into a 3-year study, to a fully operational collection unit. And it was called Grill Flame. And that was in November of 1979. President Carter gave a presentation to some news people and said, there's been a missing Russian bomber. It vanished somewhere over Africa. And of course, everybody, for obvious reasons, has been looking for it for quite some time. And we have finally found it. This is a year and a half into looking for the bomber, the aircraft. And one of the newsmen said, how did you find it? He said, we used our psychics. And he was holding a folder in his arm and it said Grill Flame on it. So that night, everything got moved around and we became Project Center Lane. That's how you get a name change. It became Project Sunstreak when the Defense Intelligence Agency took it over, and you can't have an Army name in front of a Defense Intelligence Agency project, so it becomes Sunstreak. And then it became Project Stargate when the CIA shared managerial authority with DIA until its closure in November of 1995. And they called it Stargate, and Stargate's a really cool name, and that's the one everybody knows it by. We had that name 2 years before anyone thought of the movie, so it belongs to us. It doesn't belong to anybody else. There's a huge difference between being psychic and being a remote viewer. I'm talking major differences. All remote viewers can be psychics. Not all psychics are remote viewers, but a lot of people forget the differences. Psychic functioning occurs usually spontaneously. It can't be forced. No matter what a psychic tells you, they can't say, yes, I can touch you and get all the information in the world. Now, they can touch you, and sometimes they'll get information, and sometimes they won't. But it's usually very spontaneous. Remote viewing is always planned. It's a very specific protocol. It's designed to make someone produce information psychically. So psychic functioning is generally not controlled. It's always controlled as a remote viewer, and it's controlled with a scientific protocol developed at SRI. The psychic can also know the target as they're working on it. They can be told exactly what it is they're working on and why. Remote viewer is always double blind to the target, or it's not remote viewing. You all know what I mean by double blind, right? You can't know anything at all about the target, and anyone in the room with you can't know anything about the target. There's only one single peer paper that's ever been written on the protocol. That was written at SRI in 1976, and that's available in publications. There is no other protocol, no matter what anybody tells you. There's lots of methodologies, but there are no protocols. There's lots of other kinds of information collection using remote viewing. We've done remote viewing while lucid dreaming under controls at the sleep lab at Stanford University with Dr. LaBerge. We've done remote viewing while out of body, and that's a tested, evaluated fact done at the Monroe Institute under the controls of Bob Monroe with witnesses from the U.S. Army present. They brought the targets, double-blind targets. We've done remote viewing under full hypnosis in altered states. We've done future viewing, looking into the future as far as 30,000 years. We've done, of course, you can't validate that for 30,000 years, but we have looked at it. Past viewing is a lot easier to validate, but it causes you more problems because most people that know anything about the past target will argue with you over whether you're right or wrong because they've already determined what the answers are. They're always right. There is no distance problem with remote viewing. We've remote viewed outer rim planets 7 years prior to the flybys by the Explorer series satellites and had an 88% result. Large objects, it doesn't matter how big the object is, it doesn't matter how small. I've done remote viewing with a professor emeritus in high energy physics named Ron Bryan at Texas A&M, where I have actually drawn things that cannot be seen except with an electron microscope. And the unknown. We certainly do lots of targeting of the unknown, but until we get validation through other means, there's no way to tell whether or not we're right. And the mysterious. Known facts about remote viewing. Who's psychic? Anybody know? Everybody. We know because 10,000 plus people brought into a multitude of labs and tested have all shown some psychic ability or remote viewing ability. But not everybody's a world-class viewer. It's a talent-based ability. It's very much like bowling or golf. Some people will never be better than a 20 handicap, for instance. That's the difference. It's what I call a martial art of the mind. If you do not participate in it every single day for a number of hours, you will never get anywhere. What's unique about a remote viewer's background? Very little. You don't know who's going to be a world-class remote viewer. Could be anybody. Do you have to be morally good or ethically right to be a good remote viewer or a good psychic? Unfortunately, the answer is no. We have evidence that the terrorists are using remote viewing. What can be expected statistically? Contact with the target 60% of the time. Accuracy is dependent on the method used. Can it be trained? This is a really big question. Can someone train you in remote viewing or the remote viewing protocol? Yes, they can train you in the protocol by simply reading it to you. I can train you in a remote viewing protocol in about 30 seconds. Can you train somebody to be an expert remote viewer or a world-class remote viewer? The answer is no. It cannot be trained. It's inherent in you to begin with, and it's talent-based. You can suggest different methods of approach, which may help to discipline the person's mind better, but that's the only effect it'll have. I'm running through this fairly quickly because I want to leave a little place at the end so you can ask questions, because I know you're not going to have any, right? Okay. I'm going to show you some examples of early successes. These occurred between 1979 and 1982. Test and practice targets. This is what we did, an outbounder target at SRI, that's where they actually have someone. The way it works is I go to a windowless room and I sit with a monitor, and they have someone who goes down and uses a random number generator to generate a number. They go to a safe, pull a folder out, walk out, get in the car, and drive away. When they've been gone from the place 20 minutes, they pull over the side of the road, open the envelope, and it tells them where to go. And they go there, and that's the target. And at the precise time they arrive is the time I start drawing where they are. That's basically the place they were for the previous picture. What's interesting is that picture was not taken to favor the drawing. That's exactly the picture that's in the file folder. This is another example of remote viewing, upper hard edge, that kind of thing, river, flow. You see a flow down the side and everything. Date and time of the remote viewing, and that's the actual target. The bridge wasn't in there. I guess I don't get bridges with waterfalls. This was an interesting example. The day that this occurred, I started drawing it, and I recognized it as the entry to the Stanford Shopping Center. So I said, oh, this is the main entry to the Stanford Shopping Center. The problem was, as soon as I said that, I put a big X across this drawing and said, analytic overlay, because I had been shopping there 4 hours earlier. So, you know, I thought I was remembering it. That's the actual target. It was the main entry of the Stanford Shopping Center. So you see, remote viewing can scroll itself in a way by simply having seen it before. That happened on a demonstration I did in Los Angeles for ABC, where I demonstrated a remote viewing live double blind, and they had taken the outbounder and the camera crew to the restaurant that looks like a big spider at the LA airport. The problem was I had dinner there the night before. Now what I did in that case though, is since it kept invading my mind and I couldn't get rid of it, I said, oh, what the heck, that must be it. So I drew it and I turned out to be right. This is Pete's Harbor Restaurant. It's exactly the same. It's got a wharf next to it with boats. I did not put the boat on the roof. What happens is when you get something really weird like Superman sliding down a gold post or a boat on a roof, your tendency is to not do the weird. But as you learn remote viewing, you learn that anything can happen. So you put down exactly what your perceptions are. Now, mission example, we had Department of Energy came to us and said, can you track a spy? Obviously, they want to protect their nuclear materials. So we said, sure, it's a piece of cake. So what they did is they gave me a 3x5 card with the social security number of one of their employees on it. I had no idea if this was a woman or a man or their age or anything. And what they said was they would call me on 3 occasions over the course of a year, and when they called me, what they wanted was a description of the individual and where that individual was standing. So the first call I got actually was at midnight, and I was in downtown San Francisco staying with a psychologist friend of mine, and on the tape, you can hear snoring in the background. That's him face down on his kitchen table after they woke us up to do the remote viewing. This is the drawing I did. You can see building A here is a T-shaped building with a little box on top. And I said basically the person was in the center of that building on the top floor in what they call the director's office. And I have no idea where that is. And this is the actual target. And this is the T-shaped building with the little box on top. And he was in fact in that room, which is the director's office. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and he wasn't supposed to be there. Anybody who sees my drawing automatically says, oh, that's the west gate of Lawrence Livermore Laboratories where they build bombs. Now this was another one. They called me in the middle of the night, and I could not get anything straight. This is a very complex target. It wasn't making any sense to me at all. I tried to draw it, and it turns out it was the accelerator at Stanford. In the very end of that drawing, what I said was, it's too complicated, I can't draw it. I'm just going to simplify it for you. It's a place that accelerates electrons. This was the next drawing that I did. Obviously, these are some kind of power poles producing energy, and the halos are things that are moving that I can't see from a remote viewing standpoint. It's in a form of a grid, and it's producing a lot of electromagnetic energy. And this is where the person was standing. And I got a 99% figure of merit for this because I did not give them the car and the color of the car he was in. So they said, oh, this is really good. You can actually track a spy, tell us where he is. But can you tell us what he's doing? And so they called me one afternoon and said, tell us what our spy is doing. And I drew this. This is some kind of an energy projection device locked up in a box or a big crate or something. And that's a field, and these are electronic targets. And what he's doing is destructive testing of electronics using some kind of an energy wave projector. And it's in some kind of a box. It turns out that the angle of projection is exactly correct. And this is what the actual device looks like. And what's interesting about this is all microwave. It's obvious to any engineer it's a microwave, but all the measurements on there are in inches when it should be in centimeters. All the measurements are absolutely correct, except they should be in centimeters. That's the actual device sticking out of the back of the box, and that's the actual device. Along with this was approximately 70 minutes of tape information and a whole lot of other drawings I couldn't get declassified. But they turned this over to an independent engineering group, and they drew examples of what it was and said that they could build a machine just like it, and they said what the machine was and what it did, and it turns out that they could replicate the machine based on my remote viewing. The problem with this is we never heard from Department of Energy again after this. And I think people believe that by burying your head in the sand, it's not going to make any difference. Nobody will know. When in fact, anybody can do this. It's a world-class viewer. While I was doing this, I said, the person you're interested in has a hobby too, and he goes and he looks at this thing every day at lunchtime, and it's some kind of a reflective device that collects energy and uses it in some way. But it can be tuned. There's parts of it that can be tuned really well. And that's it. And that's part of a larger area, which I drew in addition to that, and said it was the size of a football field, had a big tower, and they focused on the tower for some reason to collect energy. And that's the actual tower in the array. And what they did, feedback's real important in remote viewing. When you get something right, they like to take you and actually show it to you. So, because we don't know where the source of the information comes from, so it may be that we send the information to ourselves in the past. We don't know. So they take me out to show me the device. Well, on the way out, we started smelling, as we were driving down the desert road, we started smelling ozone. And we came over the rise, and there was a barrier in the road, and the guard stopped us and said, you can't go any further, we're in the middle of a test. And they were testing this. And Dr. May, who was sitting on my left, said, quick, put a paper bag over Joe's head because he's getting the wrong feedback. And that's probably how I got this in the first place. But what's also interesting is when the test was over and they raised the barrier, we started going further on to see the equipment I was supposed to see. And coming down a side road was this big cloud of dust. And the car pulled in on our road in front of us, and we could barely keep up with him. And who it was the man I was targeting. He goes there on his lunch breaks because that's kind of his hobby. What about the future? Can you actually target the future, and can you prove it? Well, in 1979, at the very outset of our project, when we were just fledglings and we really weren't sure about what we were doing, the National Security Council had a really big problem. They had this building in the north of the Soviet Union, and it was the biggest building under a single roof anywhere in the world. And they've been taking trainloads of materials into this building for over a year, and the carloads were coming out empty. They had no idea what was going on inside the building. It was in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by triple fences, a death wire, a division of troops, guard dogs, almost every kind of defensive perimeter you could put around it. And they had no idea what was going on in there, so it was the first #1 priority of the National Security Council. So Admiral Jake Stewart, a one-star who was working for the National Security Council, brought the target to us, and I happened to be the one next up, so I got the target. And I worked on it for about a week, and the conclusion I came to was that they were building a new kind of submarine. And the submarine had two hulls going together sideways. And it was half again larger than any other submarine in the world. And we sent that report to the National Security Council along with a huge list of all its upgrades. One of which was slanted missile tubes, which meant that they had improved their launch capability from having to stop and launch to launching while moving. They sent it back. Robert Gates, who was the Russian desk officer at the time, working on the National Security Council, sent it back, and on the top he wrote, "Total fantasy, RG." And so when the Admiral brought it back, he said, here's the response I got for you, Joe. He said, "Does this make you angry?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "What would you like me to do?" And I wrote across it in red, I said, "Well, we'll launch in 112 days. I think I said, "Fantasy will launch in 112 days, J." And he, instead of taking it right back to the NSC, he took it to the NRO and arranged to be looking at that site 114 days out. So 114 days later, they took pictures of, let me get through this. Of this submarine, which was launched 2 days prior and was sitting at the harbor with all its bay doors open, and they were loading the twin reactors with the control rods and loading all the missiles in the front bays. And we collected more intelligence on that one submarine than on the entire Soviet sub-pack in history. But that's one of those things that there was only one source of information that didn't work, according to Robert Gates. When we got the final report back, he had written across the top of the final report in red, "Lucky guess." Now, just to show you, this does not happen with just one person. I worked with another guy who came in after me. I left after 6 years, and right behind me, a man named Paul Smith came in. And Paul Smith, while working on another target, suddenly said, "Gee, you know, I see an American ship being attacked with Exocet missiles." That was predicted 112 days prior. The USS Stark was struck with 2 Exocet missiles by an Iraqi war jet, and that was 4 months prior. They didn't know what to do with the prediction, so they put it in a file. When 9/11 occurred, I know there are 2 remote viewing reports that were on file for over a year, one of which actually named one of the pilots. You don't know what to do with this material. You get psychic material, what do you do with it? How do you confirm it or deny it? Better to just ignore it. The bursting of the U.S. housing bubble peaked in 2006, caused the values of securities tied to U.S. real estate pricing to plummet, damaging financial institutions globally. It helped create the 2008 financial crisis. That's it. Pretty impressive failure. I predicted it in 2006. I predicted it in 1998 and put it in my Ultimate Time Machine book. What's interesting is I got half as many people wrote me and said, "Great job, I put all my stuff into hard metals and it saved me." And I got half again as many that wrote me and said, "Gee, I wish I had believed you." I said between 1998 and 2003 that a much greater war would be fought in the Middle East, and our war with Iraq began on 20 March 2003. This is everyone's been telling me, "No way, we really kicked their whatever." I predicted an even more significant war would follow this, 9 to 11 years, and that's the war in Afghanistan, still ongoing. But what about the future? We're hovering on the precipice of World War III, and it'll come at the collapse of the Saudi Arabia sometime in the next 4 to 5 years. That's the third prediction I'm making. Economy. It'll begin to heal, but only if World War III doesn't occur or happen. Afghanistan will collapse back into disorder following our withdrawal in 2014. North Korea. Expect something stupid to occur in the next 9 months. Wonder what that might be. Iranian atomic weapons. As a display of force, we will enter into a joint effort with the Israelis to eliminate the Iranian weapons-grade nuclear materials. This will trigger something stupid in North Korea. What about aliens? That's an alien. That's my cat Bing. He's dead now. He's gone back to the mothership. There are aliens. I spent approximately a year with some members of MUFON trying to find a target or 2 targets or even 3 targets which we could absolutely say had aliens on board, were alien vehicles. And we only had about 22,000 events to pick from. Do you know how hard it is to absolutely say something is an alien vehicle with aliens on board? We think we found 2, but we're not absolutely sure. What's telling us that we might be right is the results we're getting. The only result I kept getting for the first 6 months every time the target was introduced. See, all my targets are blind, so I don't know what they are. I have an operations person, that's my wife. She has a separate office from mine, and people contact her, and she puts my targets together, and all I ever get is a sealed envelope. And there's a pile of them, and they sit right in front of my computer, and I take them one up. And every time she slipped the alien target in there, all I ever got was a big Y, like a line this way and then 2 lines that way, like the old peace sign, remember that? It took me 6 months to figure out what it is. You know what it is? It's the inside or outside of an empty box. And as soon as I figure that out, you know what I get now? Boxes. Boxes inside boxes, boxes stacked. Once in a while, I slip in and I get some little tidbit of information, quickly followed by stacks of boxes. So I believe they have the capacity for knowing when they're being targeted and knowing how or what's actually being targeted and what information is being passed. I can't prove that yet, but I will eventually. I've been working against these same 2 targets now for about 7 years, and I've collected lots of bits of data. I can tell you things like the reason they all have big eyes is that's part of their skin suit, what I call their environmental suit. They all wear them because they're vulnerable to our atmosphere and the bugs we have in our atmosphere. If they took the skin suit off in front of us, our inclination would be to pick something heavy up and beat them to death because they're butt ugly. That's probably one of the reasons why they feel we're still very primitive and they do not want to have contact with us. Can you do something good with remote viewing? I've located, that should say missing, located 2 missing children in the last year. I've worked on probably 100 missing kids. Usually I can find them within the hour, but in many cases I find them and they're not still living. Usually the reason they're not still living is because I fought with a local law enforcement official for 6 or 7 hours just to go and look where I tell them to look. I've used it on national TV in Japan. I did 12 specials, 2-hour specials in Japan. It was supposed to be a run of 2 specials. It turned into 12, and I looked for approximately 28 missing people, some missing 15 to 60 years, and I found exactly half of them from my dining room in Virginia. And it usually takes about 5 hours. I found them both alive and dead. The person who was dead 6 years, and I directed them to his burial site. So they walked up on his stick with his name on it. I found more people than that. But I can't talk about a lot of them because they work for, the people who took them work for people like the Yakuza, which is like the mafia in America, that kind of thing. One of the few police departments I can say I work for the Commissioner of Police in Tokyo. I helped find the weapon that he was shot with. He was shot point blank with a .44 caliber handgun and survived. Shot 5 times. And they had the guy, but they couldn't convict because they didn't have the weapon, so I found the weapon. I advised a computer energy engineering group at the University of Colorado, and they made 400% profit on their own investments, and they did their own remote viewing. It's kind of cool. Russell Targ and Keith Harari earned more than $120,000 in 1982, and it put them on the front page of Wall Street. And Hal Puthoff made and donated $25,000 to a Waldorf school in '84 using remote viewing. There's at least 3 other studies using ARV to collect large sums of money, including my own, and I can't talk about that. And we provided assistance, my company, to half a dozen or more police and sheriff's departments, to include Tokyo Police. Lots of private corporations and individuals and associations over the past 34 years. In fact, I have a recurring client in one state. He owns 5 corporations, and he liked my work so well. For 15 years, I worked as a fully paid senior executive advisor, and my title was Vice President of Information for all 5 corporations, and he was the only one that knew I was a remote viewer. I got paid a full salary, and I had the full-blown 401k and everything. I did that for 15 years, and I never worked more than probably 7 hours a week. And on the national level, I've demonstrated it. Well, this is an old slide. I've demonstrated over 100 times in 7 countries, and I'm running still somewhere around 80% my success rate. And then the rest is just that. I went to Moscow in 2000, October of 2000, and that's their badge. They need that to get in their unit. I have one of those. There's only 2 in the Western world, mine and one belongs to Dr. Edwin May. What have we learned about remote viewing? It works just like any other sense. It works on change. You know, your eyes work because if you're looking for a deer on the edge of the woods, the deer has to move for you to see that deer. Everything works on change, all of our senses. So we assume that, and we're able to prove remote viewing does the exact same thing. Your intent and expectation for outcome has a decisive effect on how it works or doesn't work. In other words, if you go in not believing, it won't. And for some reason, local sidereal time has an effect on the outcome. Localized electromagnetic noise has an effect on the outcome. Now, you notice I'm saying effect. You can override any of those by your desire to accomplish. Only 2 remote viewers in history have been able to demonstrate that they know when they're right or they know when they're wrong. One was Ingo Swann, and he passed about 6 months ago, and me. And I won't tell you what you have to do to make that decision. It's not worth the effort. The study I participated in to prove that took over a year, and I said I would never do one again. I'd just shoot myself. And real targets always work better than pooled targets. You know, targets picked for practice. And it's never perfect. It will fail. It's talent driven. That's local sidereal time, rather than complicate everything with explaining that and trying to explain that. This is what it basically looks like over a year. You have that much of an improvement in remote viewing at 13.5 sidereal. You have that much of a loss in remote viewing at that point in sidereal time. Sidereal time changes based on where you're standing and what time of the year it is. This is what it looks like on our galaxy. Basically, what it means is when you're standing on the face of the Earth and you're tilted back away from the sun, or the center of the galaxy, so that the horizon is blocking the center of the galaxy from you, your remote viewing is way better. When you're tilted towards the center of the galaxy and you're exposed to it, it works worse. So black holes have something to do with it, but we don't know what. Unusual targets. I brought this because I know you guys are interested in really unusual things. This is Mars. This is an impact crater. What you can't see is in a really well-focused picture, is a road goes straight through that crater. The walls have been degraded on both sides to allow that road to go through there. What this is a pyramid. It's a four-sided pyramid with a flat edge. You can measure the shadow, and if you know the angle of the sun in relation to the surface of Mars, you can guesstimate the height of the outside wall of that canyon. It's 1,500 feet. You notice the shadow down here for the pyramid goes off the paper? How many feet do you think that is? A whole lot more. But that's not the spooky part here. Here's the hard part to believe. That's an impact crater, so that can't be there. It would have been wiped out by whatever made that impact. The fact that it's there means it was put there after the impact. Now, I've talked to scientists about it. I'm talking about straightforward scientists who really know their business, and the best answer I've gotten so far is it's a giant crystal and it grew. It's between 7,500 and 8,500 feet in height. It had to be formed after the crater was formed. Now I have a target problem. What do you think you're going to see in the next 5 minutes? Close your eyes and tell me what you think it is. It's something should just pop in your head. Anybody have anything pop in their head?
Dr. Bob.
Huh?
Dr. Bob, Coronavirus.
No. Water? Why do you say water?
I just saw water.
Mm-hmm.
I got a wet droopy sock.
Huh?
A wet droopy sock is what I got.
A wet, droopy sock? Just remember droopy. Okay, I'm going to show it to you. Feedback. Ready? You still don't know? Fascinating, isn't it? That's a good remote viewing target because it's unusual. It smacks you right in the head. And anybody think they saw that? We're afraid to say it.
Well, you saw a dome.
Yeah, it's kind of dome-like. Questions? I'm open to any questions you want to ask.
I wanted to ask about, you mentioned that there are certain areas of electromagnetic interference. I wanted to ask about ancient sites or maybe like these mounds in Ohio.
What happens, you know, we have lots of things that make remote viewing better. What happens with remote viewers, wherever they happen to be when they do the remote viewing, whatever the ambient electromagnetic noise is for the planet in that place, that will degrade it somewhat. Now, all of these things I'm saying are based on science and what we found from scientific study. But there's a caveat that goes with it. There's always a chance that it won't. Okay? In other words, when I put up the local sidereal sign and I showed you that drop, that severe drop, and I said, really bad remote viewing in there, well, I've got some of my best results in that null period. So it can be overridden by all the other things being in the right condition. So no one thing destroys psychic ability or remote viewing capability. It's a multitude of things. So if you get too many things stacked up in the negative, then it probably isn't going to work real well. We're doing a study right now, it's in progress, and the results are looking extremely promising that deal with entropy. Does anybody in the room know what entropy is? Entropy, it basically it's got something to do with the conservation of energy. Entropy is anything that exists that has a change to it that can't be reversed. You know, it's a dynamic change that you can't go back and make it the way it was before. So it's a permanent change. Well, the higher the entropy in a target, the more information that's carried. So a target that would be, let's say, a word or something you wrote on a piece of paper and put on a counter. What do you think the entropy is in that? Almost zero, because the entropy is that paper degrading. Okay? And that paper is going to take 100 years to turn to ash. So the information on it is passed not only hardly, but hardly in a really slow way. And that's why people can't get words and numbers and things like that. What do you think the entropy is on a nuclear weapon? Really off the charts, because nuclear material is always right on the edge of instability, that very dynamic change. What's interesting about that, and that's what gave us the hint about this, is in my history, which is 37 years of doing remote viewing, I have never missed a nuclear target, ever. I have especially never missed one that was detonated or attempted to be detonated. So that says something about entropy. So we're doing this experiment now, and the way the experiment works is really cool. We have an outbounder who randomly picks a place and goes to it, just like any normal outbounder target. Only on the way out the door, they use a random generator to decide, do they pick up thermos A or thermos B? And the thermos they pick up, they have no idea what's in it. But they go to the site, and they walk around the target site while the remote viewer is remote viewing them. And right in the middle of that 20-minute time that they're walking around the site, they open the thermos and dump it on the ground. Now, the thermos is going to have one of two things in it. It's going to have tap water, not very exciting and not very entropic, right? Or it's going to have liquid nitrogen. When you dump that on the ground, big cloud. It's like a bomb going off. Big cloud, lots of change. It turns out we're getting roughly about the same amount of stuff from both targets. But one has got very little accurate information in it, and the other has a vast amount of accurate information. So the live target with higher entropy does pass a whole lot more information. And let's talk about the word pass for a minute. We all know in telepathy, you can prove telepathy, right? You whisper something in somebody's ear and they think it, and the guy standing in the next room gets it. Maybe. That's not proof. It's possible that the guy in the next room just happened to think the same thing on the same day at the same time. So there's a huge hole in almost all paranormal studies of telepathy. What's equally possible is that when we're born, when we become extant, when we become alive with all the information we will ever require to do everything we're going to do in our lifetime, to the point of exit, our transition to whatever other being we're going to be. So in our lifetime, we may enter with all that information. If that's true, then what's to prevent us from going anywhere in time-space in our lifetime and looking at that information? Because everything that happens to us, to include feedback for a target or knowing whether we're right or wrong, is eventually going to happen, and that's part of that information interaction. Well, if that's true, then it really is true that space and time are an illusion. I've been doing this for 37 years, and I'm absolutely positive that space and time is an illusion. I'm going to tell you why I know that. The first demonstration I agreed to do on national level television was called Put to the Test. It was an ABC special, an ABC Disney special. And it was a pilot program, and it was supposed to be on like every other week. But they had to do a really good pilot to sell it. And so I agreed to do a remote viewing, a live remote viewing under full controls. And that got them really excited, and I couldn't figure out why they got so excited. And it turns out the first 12 people they asked to be on the program said, oh, no, what I do is really hard to do. It's spontaneous, kind of. So let's just do a rendition of something I did last month. And they said, no, we want you to actually do it. Well, I can't just do it. So they had asked 12 straight people, and they all said no. And they came to me, and I said, oh, sure, I'll do a demonstration. It may or may not work, but I'll do the demonstration. And they got really excited. Then they wanted to take me to a place that I'd never been to, which was Houston in Texas. I've been to 49 states and 101 countries in my career. So finding a city I had not been to in the United States was really tough. Well, we decided on Houston. And so I went to Houston. Well, before we started for Houston, we got a call, Ed and I got a call. We had to go and talk to the folks at Disney, and they wanted to know, before they would write this huge check to do this one segment of this show, they needed to know how exactly it worked. Well, we have about 8,000 man hours on that, or 8,000 man years, I should say, and we still don't know how it works. So basically, Joe, you invent how it works because you can lie. You're an agent, and I'm a scientist. I can't lie, so you know. So what we told them was, if you select a place that you're going to take me to later today, and I do a remote viewing of it at 9 o'clock, then when you take me there at 4 in the afternoon or whatever, that's when I see it and I send myself the information in the past. So if you pick that out of 5 possible locations, you can never tell me about the other 4 locations, because if you tell me about them, I'll send that information to myself in the past too, and it'll confuse it and I'll fail. And they bought that. And I told the guy, I said, you have to like bury this because this is top secret stuff. Oh, incidentally, we did this whole shoot 3 months before the exposure of the program to the public. So they did it based on my book I wrote, Mind Trek. They didn't do it based on the government work. So we went and we did the target and everything worked, and it was really a wonderful result and everything. And they asked me what I do when I have a really good result. I said, I always treat myself to a really expensive meal. And so they took me to Anita's, which is a 5-star restaurant in Houston, great restaurant. And so we started eating there, and Ruth Riven, the executive producer, says, you know, to really understand how well you did, I think we ought to show you the other target locations. And I said, remember the rules. She said, well, that's what I don't understand. It's all on film, it's in the cans, it's on a special plane that's already en route to LA. How's it going to change? And she's got me in the lie, right? Shut up, Ruth, eat your meal. So we got in a big argument. So at the end of the meal, when we're waiting for dessert, I took her napkin and I spread it out on the table and I made an X through it. So there were 4 squares. And I said, we know what my target was. And one was an arch with water on it, and one was this, and the other was that. And the whole table went dead silent. And she said, you knew what all of the targets were. I said, hell, Ruth, I knew what all the targets were an hour after I agreed to do the remote viewing. And she said, wait a minute, we didn't know for a month that we would be in Houston. And I said, yeah, Ruth, but you got to understand, I'm not going to wait and do a live remote viewing in front of 18 million Americans and fail. So she said, something going on here that we don't understand. I said, ta-da! Exactly. You see, for her and everybody at the table, time and space is real. It's unalterable. You can't change it. It can't be different. For me, it's all fake, it's invented. We make it up as we go. The problem is we don't know we're doing that. And that's why we get in trouble all the time. We don't know we're setting ourselves up for failures and things that are going to affect us in a major way. We don't know it.
Joe, when you talk about double blind,
Uh-huh.
when you have a client, say like a corporation,
Mm-hmm.
or say even me with the missing people, and you know it's coming down the line, so you have some basis of knowledge to start. Let's say it's
Could.
a Malaysian flight,
Yeah.
and I'm the Malaysian airline executive.
Mhm.
I say, hey, Joe, we've been in the middle of the Indian Ocean off Australia. Then I get a call that supposedly it's up off of Vietnam.
Yeah.
We really don't know where it is.
Yeah.
So you know that this is coming. How do you double blind it to get to the point where you could do it?
You probably can't in that case. So the material I give them is labeled, very clearly labeled, psychic information. But I'll caveat my name to it. In most cases, when somebody calls up and says, I have a really important target, I say, hold on, call this number. And they call my wife. And my wife interacts with them because some things are easy to target, some things are extremely difficult. And some people really don't know what it is they want. And so she'll interact with them to figure out what the best thing is that they need, the best way to get it, and how to target it. And she'll set the targeting up, and all I ever see is an envelope. So I have a stack of envelopes on my desk every day, and I work them one down. So even things I've done before, in most cases I don't know what it is I'm working on. Here's the problem that comes up. A reporter from Time magazine came to my house, wanted to do an interview, and then wanted me to do a demonstration of remote viewing for his article. I said, that's fine, but you can't know what the target is like I can't know. Because if you know, you're going to be reacting, even non-verbally, and I'm going to get stuff from you. Oh, okay. So he went to his editor, and his editor put a bunch of stuff in a double-wrapped opaque brown envelope, and he brought that with him in his briefcase. So the interview went great. And then we started doing the sealed envelope remote viewing, and it started out really nicely. I was talking about a really plush hotel and a bar and a bunch of stuff and people and well-dressed people and high society and lots of reporters, and I got all the way down to the end of a tunnel and saw the flash of an accident and realized I was doing the death of Princess Di. And as soon as I recognized that, I drew a line across it and wrote EOS, that's end of session. And I said, we're done here. He said, what do you mean? We're just getting into it. And I said, no, this is the death of Princess Diana. I can't go any further. My head's filling up with everything I read about it, or argued about it, or talked with people about it. And he said, well, we don't know what's in that envelope. And I said, contraire, I know what's in that envelope. And we got a huge argument about it. And I refused to look any further. He opened the envelope, and all these articles on Princess Diana came out all over the countertop. I got a bad write-up for being ethical. Mm-hmm. Now, what I could have done is what a lot of psychics do and a lot of other people do, is when I recognized what it was, go with what I felt he wanted to hear. And I would have been a brilliantly minded psychic. You can't do that. There's ethics and morality involved. There's a lot of people that think because the program was government, it was black, it was run by the Army, that we were doing all kinds of wildcat stuff. We had 4 oversight committees. We had a scientific oversight committee. We had a human use oversight committee. We had a morals and ethics oversight committee and a congressional oversight committee. Minimum membership, 12 on any of those committees, and there were at least 5 Nobel laureates mixed in there. Any one of them could have red flagged us and shut us down in a heartbeat. We were never shut down in 20 years. If they brought us something that involved, say, remote viewing a U.S. citizen, they better have the federal warrant sitting on the table with it, or it didn't get done. And in fact, I got in a huge war with one of my best friends in the CIA. The project's closed down. It's been closed for 6 years. I bumped into him in Palo Alto, California when I was out there for some research. And so we had lunch together, I and Ed May and he. And we're all sitting there, we're eating, and he was talking about some old cases I did for him. And I said, oh yeah, and this and that. And I mentioned something and he said, wait a minute, you never said that. And I thought for a minute, I said, oh, that's right. It wasn't pertinent to the problem. So I didn't share that. And he said, whoa, wait a minute. He threw his fork in his plate. You mean there's stuff you didn't share? And I said, of course. We only shared what was necessary to answer your job, your mission. And he said, no, that's not the way it works. You give us everything. We decide what's pertinent. And he got up, put his coat on, and left. He's never spoken to me again. He was a good friend. There are some agencies that feel that's their job. They decide what they'll use and not use. Well, because some human beings got some proclivity for something, doesn't mean it's pertinent to what they need to know. It's none of their business. Mm-hmm.
Are there any government agencies presently doing research on this? You think that there would be because there's potential use for intelligence, even though they may have buried the agent or the organization or the
You know,
deeper than,
there's always a possibility that they kept it going and buried it somewhere. The problem with that is all of the science, even though it was classified, we own and we had possession of. And no one ever came and got it from us. So if you want to continue a project, you wouldn't just outright reject 20 years of research. You'd want to maintain some of that as a... I doubt it. In fact, when they closed the project down and we went to Fort Meade and emptied out all the files and boxed up all that material and sent it to the CIA, what we found in the safes were 2.5 years of scientific reports and research that were never even opened because the science was getting in the way of how they wanted to do things. That's part of why it was closed. They were out of control. So, you know, I don't even know why it was closed. I could start listing reasons, and there's probably 15 that would be good and valid reasons why. But why, I really don't know. Yeah, back there.
Can you give us an idea of what kind of psychic warfare the U.S. government is waging against President Putin right now?
President Putin? I think it would probably be more psychological than psychic. You cannot, the Russians were really big in targeting individuals, trying to affect human beings remotely. They did a study where they took 24 lab rats, 12 of which were target rats and 12 were control rats. They put them all in a cage together and put them somewhere up in the Ural Mountains and had their psychics target the rats to raise their anxiety levels. Now the problem is, we know if you put all the rats in a cage together, their anxiety levels go up anyway, okay? But they wanted to see if they could raise them even higher. So that's what they did. And they got a report back. Their psychic said, we now know which the controls are and what the target mice are and all that. And they sent in the results. And then they went to the place where they had gotten the rats, where they were sorted and tattooed with their numbers, you know, to be control rats or target rats. And they had that scientist send them the list. And it matched exactly. What they do is they kill all 24 mice, they study the chemicals in their brains, they list them highest anxiety first, all the way to the lowest anxiety, and draw a line in the middle. Well, the top 12 turned out to be the 12 target mice. They did that 3 times. They did this experiment 3 times, and they had perfect results except for 1 mouse pair in the last test. And so they made this report and they published it, and it was leaked to the West. And you can imagine what happened here when we got that report. Oh my God, they could be targeting the president, the senators, you know. They could be, oh, gee, you know, we're in deep caca. Well, we asked them, would you be willing to run this again and run it with the one change we suggest? And they said, sure. So we gave them the change. It was a very tiny change. And they made the change, and they wound up running it 3 or 4 more times, and it failed every time. And you know what that was, that change? Don't tell the guy who sorts the mice why he's sorting the mice. Even though he was using a random number generator and he had to push a button, he was sorting them to give them the result they wanted to see, because he knew why they were testing the mice. So all we said was just don't tell him why he's sorting mice. So the only thing happening was the psychic functioning of the guy sorting the mice. All the rest of it was hand waving. So think about that, and then think about how pharmaceutical companies test drugs against placebos. I can draw a scenario, and in fact I did this. I went to a burgeoning, brand new pharmaceutical company, and I gave a paper. And the paper was, what if you're testing a placebo against a placebo? And I showed them how that could happen through intention and expectation and all these kinds of things. And how they could get a really fantastic result on a placebo, market it, and it'll work fine for a year, maybe 2 years, maybe even 3 years, until somebody drops dead using it. And when that happens, the faith of the public is shaken a little bit, and more people start finding it ineffective, and eventually they have to pull the drug off the market. That's happened with 5 or 6 drugs in the last 2 years. And I said, and the problem is essentially this: none of you believe in psychic functioning, but doesn't mean it can't happen. You're playing with fire. So I now work for that pharmaceutical company, and I evaluate their experimental procedures and protocols. Mm-hmm.
You've done very detailed drawings for somebody who's not seeing
Mm-hmm.
anything. I mean, is
Yeah.
that like an artifact that you're trying to visualize impressions?
Mm-hmm. If you look at my drawings, what you'll see is the stuff that I put down usually turns out to be correct. There's a lot of missing stuff in there. You know, stuff that's non-pertinent or is not meaningful to the mission or what they're asking for. I don't put everything in there. What they like to use me for, to be honest, is they'll have a target where they can actually photograph it with a satellite or something. They get these like pristinely pure photographs. And then they want me to remote view the same thing. Now, that's kind of crazy when I don't draw that accurately, you know, to compare my remote viewing to that. But what they're doing is, in many cases, those sites have underground facilities. And I'll draw as much of the underground facilities as I do the above ground. So they compare what I drew above ground to what they absolutely know to be true. And they'll say, oh, look, that's 86.9% real. So we can assume the same percentage for the underground stuff he drew. It's a way of categorizing the results or polishing the results in a way that's understandable. Oh, wait, back there.
Hi. As years have gone on in people studying animal capabilities,
Mhm.
cognition and so on, we find that we're on more of a continuum with them as opposed to completely separate. As far as you know, have any animals had any studies or any indications that any animals are capable of remote viewing or similar capabilities?
Lots of animals are psychic, if you want to call it that. It's an inherent trait. The reason why, I'm going to give you the reason, what we think is the reason why. We don't know this to be true, but everything points to it. Psychic functioning is a survival mechanism when you don't have any other source of information. If you, in the lifespan of humans, if you go back 400,000 years, we lived in tribal units, you know, family units. And the most psychic person in the family unit was the shaman, the leader of the group. They're the leader and the shaman simultaneously. And the reason why is we didn't have internet and encyclopedias and schools, and we didn't have a written language hardly. So we had nowhere to go for information that would keep us alive, that would say, hunt that valley and not that valley, or don't go in that cave, the cave bear's coming back to that one. You know, we just didn't have any sources of information. So the really intuitive person would notice things, and they were actually getting psychic information, but they associated it in a mysterious way with things they were observing. Like a blackbird would land a certain way against the wind on a certain limb and raise his right leg. Oh, pack up the village, we're out of here, you know? When in fact, they're getting that information psychically. They didn't understand that. It's called superstitious anchoring. But they didn't understand that. But it worked. It kept people alive. So the most psychic person was the leader, kept the group alive. That's why we're still here as a species. So it's a survival mechanism. In today's world, we're into a whole different world. We got massive computers. We got sources of information we couldn't dream of 10 years ago. We are doing so much processing now, we're burying the survival capability. So in the future, we're going to have fewer psychic people versus in the past. In the past, we had far more psychic people, world-class psychic people. Animals are the same way. Where animals have associated themselves with humans, and they get a lot of stuff from humans, and they've become dependent on humans, they're far less susceptible to psychic functioning. But some animal groups are very psychic, very intuitive, and they respond to their environment very well. So they have no other source of information. It kind of saddens me in a way, because where you have to go now to find psychics, and it's the reason why we did so well in the military group, is we went to the agents who spent time overseas doing dangerous jobs. And in my case, my survivability was probably a very short period, and I spent almost 14 years overseas. So they said, how did he do that? Oh, he must be a double agent. Bring him in, we'll talk to him. But it's doing that job is what kept my world-class psychic functioning up, you know, kept it going. So if you want to find really powerful psychic people today, go to the fire departments where they fight lots of dangerous fires. Go to the police departments and talk to the homicide guys or the people who deal with really threatening criminal types. You'll find the biggest case closers are probably powerful world-class psychics. Or go to surgeons who intuitively make the right choice when they're saving lives on the cutting table. Those are world-class psychics. And if you accuse them of it, they'll say, get out of here. I was talking to a law enforcement guy, and I said, you know, you're a really powerful psychic. He said, get out of here. I'm not psychic. I work with my gut. Okay. One more question, and we got to...
Okay, I wanted to go back with the future prediction about the World War III. Could you expound on what would lead up to that, and how could free will prevent that?
There's always an argument when you talk about the future about free will or predetermination. Things are decided ahead of time, but not by predetermination. It's decided by all the actions we've taken up to that point. We're taking lots of actions that in some cases are irreversible. The period of time we're in right now, if you really want an interesting historical perspective, is very close and very similar to the start of the First World War with the assassination of the Archduke. We're kind of in that same situation. And all we're doing is saber rattling and heating it up. We're building it up so that when that mistake happens, it's an irreversible problem. So the other problem is there's a misconception in America, and certainly in other countries, that the military starts wars. It's the politicians, because the politicians now, especially now, no longer have skin in the game. We have an all-volunteer force. No politician's son or daughter has to serve. They're completely divorced from the pain of payment. And in fact, the pain of payment we're seeing has to do with maintaining a soldier suffering from post-traumatic stress for possibly 30 to 40 years. How expensive do you think that is? And what do you think the military is trying to do right now, and the VA and everybody else, the politicians, they're trying to make that go away. No, 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 we have a cure. Well, the cure is 40 years of treatment. But they're going to try to make it all go away, because if they can't, wars are too expensive to fight. And the American public is convinced that the Veterans Administration is taking care of the vets. And I'll tell you, they're taking care of the vets all right. None of the combat vets, or very few. It's a rush job, in the front door and out the back. If you're copacetic with agreeing with them on everything, you're taken care of. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.